When he was 24 years of age, Allan Adair distressed his family even more than he had done in any of his preceding years. He went north. There was a good deal to be said for the point of view of his disappointed relatives. They had hoped much of him, the only son. They had indicated by every means in their power the way he should go. They had saved for him. They had sacrificed themselves for him. The only things they had unfortunately overlooked were the desires of Allan himself. But he had always been a difficult boy, so contradictory, outwardly so soft, inwardly so unrelenting. He would set out to do what he was wanted to do, but it never came out right in the end. His father had decided he was to be a professional man. He himself was a lawyer. Allan was to be that too, or a doctor, or a member of Parliament. The boy had always loved books of adventure certainly, but still books. However, school had brought the first misgivings as to his future. Allan did not get on, and twice, to the consternation of his parents, he played truant. This, in the 1870s, was a disrupting affair. At the conference held between Mr. Adair and the teachers, no evidence was forthcoming that there had been any persecution of Allan other than ordinary boy friction of a temporary nature, nor had there been any undue punishment on the part of any teacher. Allan was liked, it seemed, by everybody. But there it was. On 2 occasions, both beautiful days, though this fact was not noticed as significant, Allan had not appeared in classes for the entire day, and all he had to say for himself was that he had gone fishing off Parnell Point with some other boys. What boys he did not know. It was a grave business altogether. Allan was probably thrashed by his father after the second offence. This incident made more polite the politeness, and more remote the remoteness already existing between them. For his own good, Allan was forced to go to the grammar school, where he had only just managed, by dint of cramming at the last, to get through his examinations. His father could have forgiven a slow, plodding brain, and in his secret talks with God could have humbly accepted the cross thus laid upon him. But Allan was not dull. Nobody thought of calling him dull. In fact, he had moments, his teachers said, of extreme cleverness. But he was indifferent. And then he had a disconcerting way of looking up at a teacher and asking suddenly, "Is it important to know that?" and making the teacher look foolish before the whole class. His father came to the conclusion there was only one thing to be done with him, expensive though the process might be. He must be sent home to Oxford. The colonies were too slack. Something about the pioneer environment. And then Auckland Harbour was too tempting a place, and people were beginning to go for picnics on Sundays. It was a loose atmosphere for a young man. But at Oxford, in the midst of august importances, he would be forced to buck up and get on. Then the family liked the idea. A son at Oxford. Quite exciting. And they were much annoyed when Allan shrank from the prospect. He succumbed, however, to his father's wrathful amazement. Not want to go to Oxford? Did he realise what he was saying? How many young men in the colony got that chance to go? What would his friend Todd not give for the chance? Well, he had to go and buck up and prepare to make something of his life. And so, with resentment chilling his affections, but determined to buck up and sincerely hoping that Oxford would provide that ambition he seemed to lack, Allan went. He would have preferred to be setting off for Africa or India, anywhere in fact, but and he knew he ought to be ashamed of himself. He began seriously to wonder if there was something the matter with him. He knew he was more happy in a boat dreaming about the ways of the fishes in the sea than he was in planning a career. His most exalted moments were spent out of doors, where the trees did not press round him, demanding to know what he meant to do with his life, and the sea did not rise up to call him slacker, and the stars did not drop words of unkind criticism upon his head. At Oxford, he liked everything but the things he had been sent to like, and he made friends with the one man of all others he should not have known, for he agreed with him. This one, thought Allan, was a fool to have left his little New Zealand of adventure, with its Maoris and its virgin forests and its utopian government and its free and easy ways. Here Allan would interpose that the city of Auckland was as conventional as any town in England, that the immutable ways of the church, the home, and the family went on there as they did elsewhere, and that he had found no adventurous spirits among his relatives. But for a sense of duty to his father, he would have bolted from Oxford and have gone with his friend to Canada. But no, he had taken his father's money. His family were making sacrifices for him. He must go on. For 2 years he forced himself to cram intermittently, but he could not pass the examinations. At least he scraped up the courage to write to his father that he had done his best, but that it was a waste of money. His parent ordered him to come home. Allan was foolish enough to imagine, when he thought about it on the voyage back, that now he would be free to go on some pleasant pilgrimage of experimentation till he should find a job he fancied. But he had reckoned without his father. He arrived home to find that his life was settled for him again. He had been apprenticed as a cadet on the sheep run of one of his father's clients. "You have always liked the country, so this is the thing for you, and wool is going to be a big industry. You have a fine chance." Allan was trapped again, but since his return he had seen evidences of the sacrifices that had been made for him. There was nothing new in the house. The stable his father had talked of building was not built. So he went to the Hawke's Bay sheep run, but he knew he would loathe sheep. Beastly, silly animals. At first, though, he thought he might like it. He was delighted with the run itself, with its views of the hills and the sea. He liked the riding about, but unfortunately again he could not like what he was expected to like. He began to detest his boss's home. It was comfortable enough home. Mrs. Hardy was one of those Englishwomen who had taken bravely to pioneer life into mothering young cadets. The governess, too, displayed a zeal for the comfort of cadets that amazed Allan. And being the son of his father, he was not put in the detached cottage with the hands, but lived in the house with the family, and was invited to play Halma in the evenings. As he had anticipated, Allan loathed sheep. He did not like the smell of them. He was impossibly clumsy at shearing them. He was incapable of cutting off a lamb's tail and turned sick the first time he saw the operation. But it was the evenings in the Hardy household that finished him. If only they would leave him alone. He tried going up to his room after dinner to read, but Mrs. Hardy would call up in astonishment, "Oh, Allan, aren't you feeling well?" Or the governess would knock at his door and say, "Allan, don't you want to play a game?" And he would succumb. But he grew weary of succumbing. The thing churned him up inside till one day he forced himself to put it to Mr. Hardy. "I'll never be any good with sheep, sir," he began uncomfortably. Then he was hurt to find that his employer agreed with him. However, they parted pleasantly and with understanding. Allan almost screwed up enough courage not to go home, but he felt he owed his father an explanation. He consoled himself on the little coastal steamer as he looked over the shimmering beaches at the foot of the hills, that now at last his father would let him go off and find something for himself. But his disgusted parent made him feel that leaving Hardy was the worst thing he had ever done. Allan was goaded into a positive statement. "I'm sorry, but I hate sheep. Beastly things." Such passionate words about creatures so mild as sheep. His father stared at him a moment, a little startled. You have found yourself an ideal position, I suppose. Allan jumped at the chance. I'm willing to go away and look after myself and get in any kind of job I can. You can do nothing of the kind, snapped his father. I didn't send you to Oxford to become a roustabout. After all I've spent on you, you've got to get it something with a future. Think of your mother and sisters, the way they've skimped for your education. I don't understand you, sir. You're not an idiot. You're just lazy, and you think the world is a romantic place where you can dream your way along. Well, it isn't. You don't know you're well off. You have a good home and more liberty than most young men. I've never been harsh with you about your amusements. I remember when I was young. Now, I have got you a place with field, and it is more than you deserve. One of the best chances in town. Allan was jabbed by this in many sore spots. His intention during the first part of the evening to run away was weakened by his father's words. They were true enough from the parental point of view, and then the look in his mother's eyes, and the expression on the face of Edith, his eldest sister. So he went into the export and import house of Job Field, went like a lamb. But inwardly he was saying to himself that this was the last thing. If he could not stand this, he would go away and lose himself. He was put at a desk by a window that looked out over the harbour. He had to make the same kind of entry in the same kind of book every day. He had the same few feet of floor space, the same young man on either side of him making the same incredibly silly remarks about the same things each day. The only change he knew was that in the street, on the harbour, and in the sky. But he became part owner of a yacht and lived for the weekends. Unfortunately, this made him loathe the office all the more. He could imagine no medieval torment worse than dressing for the office on Monday morning. He grew murderously inclined towards the silly young men and their stale jokes. But he took himself sternly in hand. This would not do. He wondered if his yachting friends felt as he did. He talked revolt one Saturday night as they lay off one of the islands in the Gulf. Why didn't they all chuck the city and go up to the gum fields or something? They laughed when they saw he was serious. What was the use of that? They had to get on. All very well to talk, of course, but two of them had girls and visions of marrying and settling down, and the third, his friend Todd, was eating his heart out because he could not get home to Oxford. One day a youth whom Allan rather liked came from another department to his desk with an enormous piece of Kauri gum, clear as pale amber glass, with a spider embedded in the centre of it. Look at this, Adair. A chap has just come from the north with several pieces like this. Field thinks they're good enough for the museum. Come along and see the Johnny. He's an Englishman, going back home. A queer duck. Allan went and listened to a tale of wonder. Of course he knew the north had been at the back of his mind all the time. A free place where men walked about and picked up gum or just poked in the earth for it and found enough in 2 days to keep them for a week. And where you made your own little house and lived as you pleased and nobody ever came near you. And up there was the bush, the Kauri bush, like nothing else in the world, with its fern trees and parasites of the carnivorous era, and nothing horrid in it, no snakes nor wild animals, just beauty and freedom. He knew now what he craved to do. The vagabond Englishman smiled into his listening eyes. You office chaps don't know you're alive, he said with fine contempt. Both the north was not respectable. It was the land of lost men. It was peopled with nomads and wasted, and it was the roadless north, the barbaric north, where the Māoris still might war upon you in the night. It had no railway beyond Helensville. The southerner killed his lip at it. It had no gold, no coal, no minerals of any kind. It was poor land. Rivers, harbours, yes, and the bush. Oh yes, the bush. but no land. And then to go north was a confession of failure. When you could not get on anywhere else, or if you had disgraced yourself, you went north to drop out without meeting the accusing eyes of your friends. This was the city and the southern point of view. But Allan made inquiries one day and found that Field sent a surprising lot of stores to the north, and that they got an astonishing lot of gum back. That there was timber mills and fish tinning factories and isolated farms in the lost man's land. He thought about it till it went to his head, till it made his days at Fields an intolerable weariness, the jokes of his desk mates a personal insult, and the Monday mornings a tragedy. He was a failure, and he could be no worse a failure if he went north, and there he might even enjoy his demoralization. Here he never could. But for 6 more months he struggled on. Then one morning he found himself in his employer's office, and he had to say what he had come to say. "I want to say something, sir. I don't think I'm suited to this work. That is, I'll never get on at it. In fact, I hate it. It's not you at all, sir. You have been very kind. But, well, I hate indoor work." Mr. Field looked curiously at this young man in whose veins he knew some restless brew was working. He knew, too, he would never be any success at books, but he liked him none the less for that. "Anything else in the place suit you?" he asked. Allan shrank back in alarm. "Oh, no, sir, thank you. Oh, you want to leave, eh? Altogether?" "Well, yes, I do, sir," said Allan apologetically. "That's all right. What do you want to do?" "Well, I'm afraid you will think me mad, sir, and the pater will cut up frightfully. But I want to go north." "Oh, romantic, eh?" Allan flushed and moved the other foot. Mr. Field leaned forward. "Well, that's all right, Allan. Be romantic. I ran away to sea once. I don't regret it. Go north if you want to. And if you can't find anything you want to do and care to come back, there will be something here you can do." This encouragement almost upset Allan. He mumbled something about "very good" that Mr. Field could not hear, and then he spoke up. "Then would you just sack me, sir? I hate to tell the pater I'm chucking a job again." Once more Mr. Field leaned over his desk. "I won't sack you. You go home and tell your father that you are leaving of your own accord, and take what he says quietly, and never be afraid to tell anybody what you want to do." These words electrified Allan into a mood of decision that lasted all day, that stayed by him on the way home, that even survived the dinner, where his unconscious family talked as usual about things that seemed very remote, and that lasted long enough to make him blurt out the announcement to his father afterwards. At least the words had left his lips, and not even his father's sarcastic inquiry as to who had offered him a partnership could alter the fact that the thing was said. In the short and bitter interview that followed, Allan kept his temper, and kept saying to himself that this was the last time he would have to listen to his parents' indictment of him as a defaulting son. He went straight to his room, but he could not stay there. It was drizzling outside, but he put on a top coat and went out through the kitchen to walk up and down the suburban road, wondering how he was going to get through the next 2 days. When later he stole in by the back door, he hoped they would all be gone to bed. The house was still and the hall lamp turned low. Then he stiffened as a shrouded figure glided up to him. "Don't let them stop your going," whispered a voice in his face, and then his sister Edith passed on like a shadow to her own room. It was one of the most exciting things Allan had ever heard. Edith was on his side, and he had supposed her hostile too. He sat on his bed thinking about it. He had got on quite well with his elder sister when they were little together, but they had drifted apart in their adolescent years. They had never quarrelled, but they no longer confided in each other. Allan had hardly thought about it for a long time. So much was he sufficient unto himself, and so much for granted did he take the surface politeness of his home to be all one ever got from a home. And his sister Edith had been as quiet and as aloof as himself since he had returned from Oxford. His mother had hinted to him that she wanted to marry Harry Dean, but that her father would not allow it, and she had warned him never to show that he suspected anything. Now he wondered if Edith still wanted to marry Dean. And why didn't she if she wanted to? After all, she was 26 years old. Harry Dean was reputed to be wild, but he seemed a good sort. He determined to tell his sister that if she wanted to marry Harry, he would back her up. Allan went down as usual to breakfast, but he felt wretched. His mother gave him a dumb and agonized look, and Edith a swift but non-committal one. His father ignored him and retired behind his newspaper. Ida and Dora looked thoroughly resentful of this fresh eruption into the peace. He left the table before anybody and went to his room to wait till his father should be well ahead of him along the road to the tram. Then he told his mother that he would come home that evening to pack a few things and that he would go to a boarding house. He could not stand that atmosphere for 2 weeks, and nothing she could say would change his decision. He did not see his father again, but he forced himself to write the kind of letter he felt he ought to write, a letter of thanks for what he had done for him. He made no boasts about the future, and as he knew that nothing could soften the blow, he did not try to soften it. He saw Edith alone only once in an hour in which neither of them said the things they wished to say. After all, he could not bring himself to tell her to marry Harry Dean when she herself had never mentioned him. And she could not bring herself to tell Allan how much she had always cared for him, her elusive brother. But they both agreed that when children grew up they should do what they wanted to do, and having touched thus lightly upon the fringes of the vital subject, they sheered away from it, scared of letting themselves go. Mr. Field was a great relief to Allan. He was the one person who took his madness calmly. "You'll get on all right, Allan. Don't take less than 30 shillings a week and found for outside work. If you pick up any gum, send it direct to me, and if you are ever stuck for £10, and his father sent him £10 at the last by his mother and Edith. His first thought was to send it back, but his mother put her hand on his arm. No, please, Allan, she said, her lips quivering. He rather resented her trading on his last hour feelings in this way. He resented them all as he lay in bed trying to sleep. What was the matter with them, this atmosphere of woe? He was young, he was well, he was all right. He would show them, if only they would leave him alone.